Okay, we've started the recording. This is the Rural Resilience meeting. And our goal for this meeting is to share out the work of the task groups that we've been doing thus far and receive input. We have 2 hours. It's a lot to go through in 2 hours. So I'm going to try to ask people to be succinct and focused.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, hang on a minute.
Try to ask people also to be really focused. I know there's a big temptation and we're all super busy to be multitasking, but I feel like we're at a really important time where we should be hearing from each other and understanding collectively what is going to be put forth as a recommendation from the subcommittee. So really want to try to get people to listen actively during this meeting. So I will share my screen. We do have a presentation, and I'm just going to share it like this because it just feels easier. And it's okay that the other ones are showing. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay.
But not in presentation mode.
Yeah, that's fine because I don't have it in that. So I just kind of wanted to go back, and we shared this on one of the screens that we did at our stakeholder meetings recently. Oh, I guess we have to go through the business part of the meeting. Looking at, I don't even have the agenda. I have no idea what the agenda is. But really, like I said, the intent of this meeting, we're going to go through our minutes. We're going to go through the stakeholder, just do a real quick debrief on the stakeholder meeting. I think we'll move part of the agenda up to talk about part of the next steps because we're going to lose a couple of people. So we'll move that up and figure out what our next steps are a little earlier. And then, like I said, the crux of the meeting is to go through and have task groups share out the work that they've been doing and the recommendations that are coming forward. A big part of our next step is going to be prioritizing, and what that means is bringing a sort of a top 10 list from our subcommittee forward to the committee, the council rather. So that's what we need to cover today. First order of business is to approve the 10:25 minutes. And so I can give folks a couple of minutes to go through those if need be. Would that be appreciated, or have you already read them?
Would be appreciated.
Okay, a couple minutes then to read through those and let us know if any changes need to be made. Does anybody have any corrections that need to be made? Anything that stands out that seems incorrect? If not, then are we good with approving those minutes? Yeah, give me a thumbs up. If you're a voting member, please turn your camera on and give a thumbs up. Maybe if we could just keep a camera on for the meeting and just feel like we're part of the meeting in this today. Thank you.
As long as you don't mind me watching me eat, that's fine.
If you can shut it off if you don't feel comfortable eating on camera, that's fine. I'm fine watching you eat. Doesn't matter to me. I just want to have as many faces as possible so we can really feel like we're having a dialogue, and that's tough to do when people don't have their cameras on. Okay, so getting into the work at hand here today, just wanted to go back and revisit what kind of grounding again. I like to try to start off each one of these with a grounding, but we had this in the slides that we shared with the stakeholders, and really just what we're focusing on: identifying, evaluating, and analyzing existing and new strategies and programs that build resilience and prepare the state's communities, infrastructure, and the economy to adapt to the current and anticipated effects of climate change. So just soak that in for a minute and make sure that, I don't know, I for one feel like I've been so focused on like the language in these actions that maybe like stepping back for a second and saying, what are we really supposed to be focusing these actions on, would be a good thing for task groups to do as we really wrap up the recommendations. And I don't think I did an animation on this, so I'm just going to delete this right now. So this is sort of where we're at. I think we had said that step 4 for the stakeholder would come in October, and that changed. So we obviously just completed the November stakeholders. It's been a really busy month, and hopefully, I don't know exactly who was able to attend those stakeholder meetings. Hopefully you were, and got something out of them. There's the summary. I provided the summary. It's linked on the Climate Action website also, but I did provide a summary and some materials that were shared with you. So definitely encourage you to look through those. They're pretty detailed. We will be getting more detailed summary on the last one. That just hasn't been provided yet because it was the last one, and this was the summary was completed right after that meeting. So more details to come on the municipal stakeholder meeting that we had. But now the work really is to prioritize our actions. And so today, vetting them with each other, and then on the 6th, really working through that in more detail to provide input that we hear today, and to think about for each task group and as a subcommittee as a whole, because I don't think we would be doing the right thing to just say prioritization means each task group pick 2 or 3 things. I think we have to look at the collective sum with the work that we were doing and the task that is at hand here, what our mission is, to make sure that we prioritize what the subcommittee feels are the best actions to meet those goals. So we can get into more detail about what that prioritization means towards the end of the meeting. But I do want to talk about now before we lose more people. Go ahead, Chris, before I go on. Go ahead.
Well, this may not be the right time, but I'll just say, based on my participation in the input sessions, my observation is, and I'm coming at this right from a planner who is supporting adaptation and resilience conversations, that we're actually leading ourselves. That really, when we start getting down to the municipal level, organizational level, business level, household level, I don't think there's a good grasp about what adaptation and resilience actions are. I think we're still coming to grips with that, and the scale and of that we need to be talking about. And that's not a complaint or criticism at all. I think it's like, and we're doing a good job. And in the priorities and all, we talk about all these tools we're providing, but it's kind of like, in some respects, I feel like people are thinking they need a nail and a hammer to fix a loose board when the foundation's failed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we're at. And I'd be interested in what others have to say. I'm not meaning to start a big discussion right now, but no. I think we kind of just need to do the best we can and just recognize there's a shit ton of work to be done. And planning's an iterative process. We'll catch up.
I appreciate that. And it's definitely a great insight. I felt like that when I was reading the meeting minutes too, but let's hold that, because we are going to decompress about the stakeholders a little bit, realizing we don't have a ton of time to do that. But right now, I just kind of want to get a sense for, we have the December 6th meeting on our calendars, I think for 12 to 2. And I wanted to see if we expand that meeting, are folks able to do that? And if so, I really think we should carve out enough time to do that.
When was that again, Andrea? Sorry.
It's the 6th. It's a Friday again. Fridays seem to be the best for this group, although it's challenging at any time, I think, to get us together. But can we go from, should we think about extending it on one side or the other? And are people available to do that? And if not, we'll have to talk about how to get the input that we need or get to the next step.
I can do that. That works for me. But I'm wondering, I mean, sometimes what helps with making large groups making decisions is someone develop a draft. And I'm not volunteering myself, but
I mean, I
a draft of a
yesterday.
streamed down, a draft of the goal that we're trying to get to, Andrea, which would be, you know, a streamlined, whatever you want to call them. Is it?
Oh yeah, there'll be considerable work between now and then to do that.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it may come the day before because we're all so maxed out. I mean, I spent hours after work this week putting those summaries together because everybody's maxed out and couldn't get them to me until Wednesday. And so that's why we got them yesterday morning. But the summaries were there. I hope that people had time to look at them, but I know that they were only shared yesterday. So that's where we're at with those summaries. That's something similar, I would imagine, to what you'll get for the next one, but it'll be pared down because it'll be more prioritized.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
So, yeah, definitely agree that we need to be focused. And I just, anybody else, as far as a thought on if we'll have in-person, if in-person is helpful, or if we want to do it virtually, and if we can extend it. If we do it in person, where should that be? Anybody have thoughts on that?
Right now we have it, Andrea, in our calendars from 1 to 3, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that the 13th or is that the 6th?
No, that's for the 6th.
Okay.
So I'm available, I think perhaps looking to see if we could, you know, schedule it for earlier. Once you start to get later in the day on Friday, I feel like it's tough.
It's a lot. Yeah.
So maybe noon to 3, or I don't know what works for people, but I'm available on Friday. So that
noon to 3 makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Okay. And what is the feeling of virtual or in person? Is that a hand up for in person?
No,
Oh, sorry, it was a delayed response for the
Okay.
extended.
Great.
I
Okay.
can't. In person, I have to drive more than an hour to get to Montpelier.
Yeah, I know.
I
that's-
love in person, but I just can't afford the time.
Yeah, I think we'll just do a virtual then, because last time we just had like 6 people too, and it's fine. I think sometimes hybrid is more difficult.
Not that the meeting hangs on me at all, but I'm tapped out from 1:30 to 3:30 at least with my mom's
Yeah.
medical appointment. So,
Yeah, I saw that. Okay, we'll try for 12 to 3 and we'll try to do it virtually and see how that goes. And if we end early, then we'll just get done early on a Friday, which is great. Okay, moving on to our stakeholder sort of decompression. Really, like I said, we have a lot to go through with the task, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, although I think it's really important. So I do encourage you all to look at the, I will look into when we'll get more detail on the municipal, but there's the videos also. So if you are not able to attend, then hopefully you can find some time, put your earbuds in and go for a walk and listen to it at high speed. Won't take that long. They were only an hour and a half long each. So if you can listen to that, watch the video, read the summaries, I think it'll be really valuable. We really should be listening to what people said and making sure that our actions, our prioritized actions reflect that. So this is just sort of high level what I took from it. It's a little bit different from what was provided to the council earlier this week on a summary, but from the business support organizations, definitely remember, and what stood out to me was more support in the disaster planning and preparedness, what to do. And really, I felt like, and I want other people to weigh in, but really an emphasis or good points raised, I thought, about there's a lot, quite a bit of discussion on trusted entities and making sure that that support and technical assistance comes from people who they're familiar with. So I don't know what that looks like necessarily, but on the ground organizations. So maybe supporting that more. Definitely heard about balancing the need for more housing development near downtowns, but also, you know, obviously, I said ensuing, but I meant ensuring resiliency because of a lot of our downtowns are the places that are getting impacted. And then sort of a new theme, and certainly relates to the public health pathway that we're considering, is climate impact on workforces. And so something to keep in mind when we hear the report out from public health today too. Municipal support, again, more support on planning preparedness and what to do. I think there was quite a bit of an emphasis on how overwhelming it is to have to experience this and not really know where to go for the resources. And so having more support and assistance for applying for grants and different things. And I think that could be either, you know, on the preparedness or the recovery side. So that was a theme for sure. And relying on what is already out there. So it's kind of funny because I felt like we heard we need more support, but maybe it's all saying like these entities are out there, they just need more support to help provide the support that they're meant to provide, you know. So really relying on what's already out there, but enhancing that. And then again, from the municipal side was the social resilience and thinking about people and individual resilience. So that's what I threw out there. I would love to hear if other people attended. Chris, you just had some good insight as well. So any other thoughts from other people?
I attended the municipal support orgs and also the one for municipalities. And I think Chris's comment is astute, as well as this idea that all that stuff is out there, but you know, how do you navigate it?
Yeah.
There's no one, you know, anyway, it's hard.
Go ahead, Chris.
And what I mentioned during the climate council is that, and I asked the question during the forum, I think, to what extent is it that the information is not available, or if we scratch deeper, is that it's in language that people can't understand because it's like FEMA-ese, or, you know, it's government-ese. It's not, you know, USA Today English for volunteer select board members. The other question is it that the information isn't available, or is it that the information that they see, the programs that they see that are available really aren't of help? They're not addressing the critical need. So, and so is saying that they need more information and outreach, is it actually that the information outreach that they're getting isn't particularly helpful to whatever the critical need is at that moment? And that's probably something we could, that could almost be a master's thesis or something, but I do think it's a question that in the future, if we can kind of scratch the surface on that a bit more, I think it'll help us understand exactly what's being asked for.
Mm-hmm. Scott?
I just want to second what everybody's been saying, and also put it in a perspective of a representative from a municipality. And I think it's a combination of everything Chris just said. There's information out there, The question is, how do we get the information to the relevant people that need it? I was going to speak about this a little bit more during our presentation from the community capacity group, but I had a conversation with one of our city councilors the other day, and he brought up, I didn't bring up, the need to improve and increase our weatherization program for the older stock, housing stock we have in Essex Junction. And he and I talked about this sort of vertical and horizontal lack of information. So getting the information to us from regional planning commissions and state offices is one thing. But then getting the information from the municipal organization to households and other multifamily units is quite another thing. And I think there's a challenge in all of this. And especially for communities that have less resources than we do. I mean, we have 6 full-time staff who are working on various aspects of our programs. Most towns are lucky if they have a town clerk,
Yeah,
maybe a part-time planner. So I think
Yeah.
there's a big challenge here.
yeah. I think that's a great point. And so much of what is in the Global Warming Solutions Act for us, I mean, if you do a search in there for rural, it comes up like rural, rural, rural. It really is asking us to look at how to provide that support beyond those more, resourced entities. Go ahead, Alice.
Yes, very quickly, what Scott says is absolutely accurate for municipalities. Some are well staffed. Some have more volunteers than others. And in many ways, your local governments aren't going to operate unless you have volunteers and volunteers that are willing to really put themselves out there and do work. We've been facing this in Waitsfield because we haven't had a town administrator for over a year. The other thing here is to be careful and to understand that we may get into here, another one of these feelings by municipalities that this is yet again another unfunded mandate from the state. I think it's important that the municipalities understand what they need to do, but they also are going to need support in resources. There's plenty of local agencies here in the valley, Mad River Valley, that are working towards these goals. But our rural, I think our rural and less staffed town governments are going to need that help and not get into being underfunded.
Yeah, a lot of it is going to be funded. I think, the state feels the same way all the time. We got unfunded mandates coming at us often. And so it's not something that we want to be putting out there. And I think we should, as this relates to what we're putting forward for actions, I'm sure, investment comes up a lot. Funding, investment, those things are just going to keep coming up. But just to say, provide funding, and this is the actions that I wrote say provide funding. It's like, where is that going to come from? So I think we should be thinking about writing some, and we had a good discussion with Neil Kamen this morning, and this came up about maybe there needs to be more on the side of being creative and thinking about the funding sources or using existing resources in a different way and coming up with some different frameworks for making better use of what's already out there, because funding is just, it's not going to be there. It's not often that we just keep having new funding sources for this type of thing. So anyway, I'm not sure, maybe it was Chris who had.
Val should go first.
Thanks, Chris. One thing I didn't hear come up, and I only attended portions of both the community meetings, is how municipalities, are they struggling to figure out how to stack federal incentives and then how to layer that onto state or any local incentives. And I don't know if that's because municipalities in Vermont have it all figured out, or did I just miss that? Or like, yeah, that's probably not, yeah, we probably don't have that all figured out. And I know we addressed that in one of the action items on the infrastructure and built environment action items, but I think this could be an area where we could support municipalities as how to stack the federal incentives, the ones that remain post January 20, whatever it might be, in a way that provides the greatest benefit to ratepayers from a rate perspective, but also from a benefits perspective.
Mhm. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, we should move on to our actions. Again, encourage you all to kind of dig into those stakeholder.
Hey, Andrea, just one last, can I offer just one last thing?
Yeah.
Alice was I think I agree with what she said about the unfunded mandate concern, but the other thing that I deal with on a regular basis is there is an issue with towns wanting to have it both ways, which is that not wanting an unfunded mandate, wanting more funding. But the other challenge is for this, that ultimately at the select board level, they have to make decisions, and they're not going to be easy decisions, but they're going to have to make them, and they can't keep putting off well, they can. It is totally within their power to have conversations and make decisions and make them in a timely manner, and to choose like following more adaptation resilience paths. But if some of these things, result in, abandonment of roads, making a decision to explore, how do we move our village center, as we evolve it to grow up and out, those kinds of things, those could be really hard conversations, but they have to make the decision to do them. And you can't just punt to the, hey, this is hard for us, because they are empowered, all 250 or some odd of them. That's their responsibility. And somewhere we've got to lay that out.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we get to that in our actions.
Sorry, tough love. I mean, it's the fact. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely critical. Scott, are you going to take it, or Marion, is it you? Do you want me to share my screen? I think we talked about you'd rather go off the Word document than the PowerPoint. Is like, where'd Marion go? There you go.
Yeah. So we've got three pathways to talk about. Marion will take pathway 14 and also the emergency response initiatives. I was appointed as a coordinator between, or what do you want to call it, coordination point between the cross-sector mitigation task group and liaison and the rural resilience and adaptation subcommittee. So I'll give a little bit of a readout on that. And then Bronwyn's going to talk about housing. And then we want to wrap up with some research that Dahlia did on businesses and business responses to emergencies. So Marion, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And I
do you want to share?
Andrea, I can share my screen with.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Great. So I'll start with, sorry, I know you're not seeing the screen yet.
And just for time wise, we're going to try to move on to the next task group a little bit before 1 o'clock. So,
yep. Sorry, my screen is now frozen, so hopefully it starts to share soon. But I'll just start chatting until it does. So talk about pathway 14 or pathway 1 for the focus of the community capacity and planning group. And we'll just say, I think a lot of the comments that folks shared about sort of municipal capacity, the concern over, kind of unfunded mandates, but the need to have these concrete conversations is a lot of what we've been talking about in the subcommittee, particularly under pathway 1. I think there's still work to be done on how to kind of take that feedback from the municipal input sessions and the business input sessions, as well as there's a lot of crossover with municipal support and relationships there. and work those into actions here. So I think more work to be done on that, but would love to kind of get people's feedback on that as we kind of work through these actions. Sorry, I'm still frozen, so I'm not sure if it's going to share. I'm assuming all you can see is the black screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to bring it up myself. I only have the infrastructure ones open, I think.
Well, I will just say, I think while the screen is black, if folks want to, I put the link in the chat to where kind of all the documents are saved on the website for today's meeting. And the package of all of these that Andrea put together is there. So you could pull this up and kind of walk through it individually.
Thank you.
So I'll just start just in the interest of time. Sorry, I don't know why it's still frozen. It's really having a hard time today. There we go. Can you all see it now? Finally. Okay, here we are. Yeah, talk about computers crashing, Andrea. Mine does the same. That's really frustrating. Okay. So Pathway 14, or sometimes referred to as Pathway 1, talks about increasing capacity for climate resilience planning and implementation and to address the inequities of under-resourced communities. We just earlier this week were chatting about sort of expanding that a bit more to speak to not only under-resourced communities, which I think we infer as talking specifically about municipalities, but expanding that to talk about sort of businesses and other partners who are sort of involved in their communities, and wanting to expand that so we can be a bit more inclusive of who we're speaking about. So that's work that we'll be focused on. The first strategy under this, we have revised and sort of combined strategies A and B to speak more broadly to providing kind of tools and resources, both related to kind of tools, technical assistance support, and then the funding resources for local and regional climate adaptation planning and project implementation. So there were two strategies that were similarly worded about providing resources for these efforts and combined them into one strategy. So that's new, and you'll see the rationale kind of spoken to here about combining A and B. And then there are a number of actions under here. In the 2021 CAP, there was only sort of one action around a climate planning toolkit. So we've expanded that to speak a little bit more to some of the work that the Climate Action Office is leading around expanding access to planning resources and support for climate action broadly, and then also speaking to some other partner support from other state agencies. The toolkit is still, being worked on. It's been a while now, and it was on the back burner for a bit, but is being picked up by staff in our office. So that language has been revised, but that action is still here. And the rationale for that is because the toolkit's not complete yet. So Andrea, to your question, earlier this week, we don't have rationale filled into the column all here, but happy to kind of speak to it as we go through.
Can I just interrupt you really quickly, Mary? Can you give me like a 20-second sentence or two about the difference between the MVI and the toolkit?
Yeah, the toolkit is intended to be a collection of resources pointing to other state activities around and thinking about how to kind of view and speak to climate action and climate resilience across what AOT and AG and VEM and other partners do. So the MVI is really one mapping tool that can help a municipality do a particular vulnerability assessment. The toolkit is intended to be essentially like a list of those resources in one place to kind of point to and speak to it in various sectors.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I think as we think about the toolkit completion, wrapping up early next year or into next year, thinking about how, as much of what's been covered today, thinking about how we expand on that to provide support, to make it easier to figure out what's what and what all those resources are. I think, we've talked about this previously and it was mentioned a little bit today. There are a lot of programs out there, but it's hard for folks to know what exists and really what's accessible to them for either the problem they're trying to solve or the level of capacity they have. And that's really the intent of the toolkit, to help provide those resources. So actions related to kind of helping to expand and think about the rollout of that. There are new actions in here related to a project that the Climate Action Office is kicking off that was sort of built off of the last climate action plan around a climate planning framework. So to Alice's point and others, thinking about how can we build off the existing planning work that municipalities do, but provide both a framework and a guide to think about how to incorporate kind of key principles of climate planning into that existing work. So not to develop new plans, but rather how do we kind of connect the local hazard mitigation planning with the energy planning, with what municipalities might do in developing capital plans and other types of planning efforts that they already take on. I think to that piece about an unfunded mandate, it's tough. And I think as we talk about climate planning, it often feels like sort of a separate piece that needs to happen, but many communities are already paying for it through the damages they experience through flooding or other impacts. And so I think really thinking about how can we incorporate those key considerations that we're seeing and kind of conversations that need to come up from communities that have experienced flooding, that have dealt with recent wildfires, and build that into a process that builds off kind of existing planning work. Sorry, I know we have to go fast here. So other actions kind of around aligning that with various funding sources to kind of help implement that work. Speaking to establishment of additional funding to ensure regional planning commissions can help with the application and management of hazard mitigation grants. This is something Caroline has brought up, which is a gap and would really be an extension of the technical assistance that RPCs already provide to help really do those adaptation projects. And then moving on to the next strategy, which is these are actions that Caroline was working on. She wasn't able to join today. The three that you see here in the second column are all coming from the updated state hazard mitigation plan. So, Caroline has said this in subcommittee meetings, but wanting to ensure as we update actions in the CAP, we ensure that we're sort of reflecting the great work that went into the updated state hazard mitigation plan and the actions that were revised there. So the first one speaks to finding and securing sustainable funding for the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund that was established in the last legislative session. The second is around evaluating the efficacy and considering revisions to ERAF and thinking about how that can sort of build and contribute to the resilience of communities through the support that ERAF can provide if they need certain elements. And then the last is speaking about sustainable and long-term funding to support hazard mitigation and local match, and sort of broadly focused on kind of those key hazard mitigation activities that the EM spearheads with a lot of municipalities and regions. So those are kind of updated actions from pulled from the state hazard mitigation plan that we want to ensure are reflected in the CAP here. And with that, I think, I don't know, do we want to take questions or wait for our?
Why don't we go through everything first?
Yeah. So I'll turn it over.
So I'm gonna tell you briefly about coordination liaison with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. And I should say they have 3 task groups. They have one on electrification, they have one on transportation, and one on thermal sector. I've spent most of my time, well, all of my time pretty much, with the thermal sector task group. Before the next meeting, I'll reach out to the other 2 task groups to see if there's anything relevant to us and be able to report back on them for the next meeting. For the thermal sector task group, they've come up with 9 pages of strategies and actions that they want to support in the next CAP. Now that they're pretty much finalized, I will share that document with you, Andrea, for distribution amongst us if you would like.
Okay.
There's quite a number of activities in here. Under the thermal sector task group, they divided up into 3 focus areas. First is buildings, the second is equipment, and the third is fuels. And also they have a cross-cutting theme, and the cross-cutting theme really pretty much deals with the clean heat standard and how that's going to be applied and what the options are for the CAP based on different scenarios for the clean heat standard. And that was done yesterday, and there's some readout on that from yesterday. Under the buildings, most of their effort has been on weatherization, and that includes looking at prepping buildings, older stock buildings for weatherization, including vermiculite removal and other dangerous materials that have to be removed prior to weatherization. They've basically looked at legislative regulatory recommendations and a little bit on technical support and workforce training. They have mentioned in here a target. They haven't set the target yet, but they wanted between now and the end of the next step, they would like to do X% scale initiative, upscale weatherization efforts in Vermont. I think Melissa reported at the municipal meeting that I think 40,000 homes have been weatherized to date under the Weatherization Assistance Program. The target for 2030 is 120,000 homes or residence units, let's call it. So there's quite a gap between now and then. So they're looking at how to ramp that up. Under equipment, mostly it's dealing with making sure that the RBs and CBs and other heat standards are updated, building heat standards are updated, and also there's good training and outreach on what's required. Under fuels, it's basically looking at improving. On equipment, also they're looking at standardizing best practices for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. Under fuels, it's basically looking at making sure that that emissions are going to be minimized based on best fuels used. One or two other things that they have in what they call the parking lot, which I think are relevant to us. And there will be follow-up by me with their task group. Number one is in the existing CAP, there's something called a energy coordinator. Or energy navigator, I think it's called, that was supposed to be located at the RPCs. I think most of the RPCs, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, have energy officers or energy coordinators within their structures. What the task group, the thermal sector task group is proposing is that there be 5 energy navigators placed at the public service department. And the 5 navigators would work closely with families and households looking to weatherize. I suggested, and we're going to do this, that Dave Farnwas, who's the coordinator of the task group, and Sam Lash, who works with Central Vermont RPC, will get together and talk about this whole issue of outreach and engagement, the things we've been talking about just previously in this meeting. We're going to try to come up with some solutions for how to improve both vertical and horizontal outreach and engagement for weatherization programs. And obviously, I'll report back and try to engage you guys in that discussion if we have some ideas. Whatever we come up with might be relevant also for emergency response and other activities under the resilience subcommittee. I think that's all.
Can we scroll down here? Because I see new, wait, are we talking about?
Pathway 16 is Pathway 16 is
the thing.
Yeah,
okay.
Pathway 16 is the fuels.
Okay.
Reduced fossil fuels.
Okay. Sorry.
So we can move on. Oh, one other thing mentioned, and Bronwyn and I've been talking about this. I was at the housing conference, the VHFA housing conference a week ago, and talked to some Efficiency Vermont people who are looking into, for lack of a better term, zero emission modular constructed homes that are affordable and also meet, I would call it, close to zero emissions. They have a pilot program going on, and Champlain Housing Trust is now piloting that in Burlington. So Bronwyn and I will be talking to their lead on this next week and seeing if we can find some stuff that might fit either within rural resilience or also in the cross-sector mitigation subcommittees. Okay, Bronwyn, you're up.
Great. So Pathway 18, ensuring that all people have access to safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing. Forgive me if I sound like I'm beating a dead horse or a record on repeat. I think I've said this before, but I'll say it once again. I think maybe the largest amendment we're looking to make is just to the strategy to make this really clear that the strategy is about building the housing that is needed for Vermonters, given our the folks who do not have homes, given changing demographics, given the loss of housing to flooding. And so it's pointing to the housing needs assessment, just to say that the goal of this, making sure that people are resilient, is to make sure that we have the housing that people can be in to be stable, have affordable housing, and therefore be more resilient to all of the other impacts from climate change that folks are going to be dealing with. So recommending that we just change the language in the strategy. I think a lot of the specifics of what's going on in housing is happening elsewhere and is likely to continue. It's certainly one of the governor's priorities. So rather than repeat all of the things that are going on in housing here in the climate action plan, I think just keeping this pathway and keeping the strategy at the forefront is important. And then there's a handful of actions in here that we've amended the language slightly. So one of the larger initiatives is related to workforce and training, expanding a pilot program that trains small local builders to design and build housing. And this would be to advance or to implement some of, say that a different way. This would be to move ahead after we've spent a lot of time trying to remove regulatory barriers. So through the Homes Act, making it easier to build multi-unit housing in downtown areas served by water and wastewater. We've essentially preempted a lot of local zoning that would make that harder to do. And then also with Act 181, some of the land use. So essentially we've done that work to make it easier to build housing. And now we just need the builders who are trained and have the tools to be able to go out and start building housing. So still a lot of barriers in terms of workforce capacity to overcome, but I think that's probably the most important thing to really highlight. There was an existing action here that we're trying to figure out. It was one of those ones where the wording wasn't very clear. We weren't necessarily what it was referring to, but I think I've honed in this expanding the existing program to relocate mobile home park homes and residences outside of the flood vulnerable locations. I think this is referring to the Rapid Response Mobile Home Infill Program. I spoke briefly with the program manager for that. Sorry, not the program manager, but I've spoke briefly with someone in our housing department who works on that program. And my sense is that they are in process right now of spending their roughly $7 million that they have to do this, working with a whole group of folks from VTrans to some of our housing partners. And my sense is that this is underway and they're not necessarily in a position to be asking for more or different, other than just let us keep doing this work and see what comes out of it. We have some stuff in here around residential building codes and also resilient building codes. The simple version of this is the first adopt a residential building code. I think Stephanie's in the room and maybe can speak to how not having a residential building code does not serve us well in terms of the National Flood Insurance Program, although who knows what's going to happen with that. But baseline, adopt a residential building code also works for housing in the sense that it really levels the playing field in terms of the folks who, the types of housing that are required to follow a code versus the types of housing that are not required to follow a code. And how that just kind of creates an uneven playing field and doesn't necessarily help to incentivize the kind of affordable flood safe housing that we want to see, et cetera. The more complicated version of looking at codes would be also to look at resilient building codes and zoning. So this action is cautious in pointing to the fact that there's already a lot of work going on in terms of adopting a residential code, updating RBs and CBs and looking at compliance with it and the IBC. So this is in here as a placeholder. And I think ideally what we would love to see is that the group that is talking about building codes as the cross-cutting issue picks up resilience as part of their work and part of their recommendations. But for now, it's sitting here so it doesn't get lost. We talked a little bit about the need to create some educational or informational materials for municipalities and decision makers in municipalities to help them understand and be able to talk more about the intersection between housing and climate. I mean, we've talked about it here. It's taken a long time to kind of build the support and understanding of how housing policy and the housing crisis is also climate crisis and vice versa. But getting some information out to municipal leaders to help them understand that would be potentially useful. And then the last one, so improving recovery communications. I think actually, you know what, this seems like it's out of place. This might be a typo. It doesn't seem like it's related specifically to housing, so leave that. The other strategy is around actually making the investments to be able to increase housing. So this is essentially, this was in one action above. It was about training the workforce and builders to build the kind of housing we need to see, and also increasing funding for home starts. I just separated them out because, you know, one is capacity and training for the builders. The other is more of a funding strategy, just to make sure that we are providing funding for new home starts. The other piece is there was some stuff in here originally about a rental registry database. I pulled that out because a lot of what we've been talking about is the need for sort of data and information to kind of understand what's going on with housing from various pressures, but also specifically from climate impacts. And so I've pulled out these things into a separate strategy around developing data sets and analysis on the intersection of climate and housing policy. I've reworded the rental registry. The rental registry was really my perception anyway, is that the rental registry came out of a place where, you know, maybe a little bit wanted to understand safety and safety issues in rental units, but also wanted to understand how the short-term rental market was impacting housing. It just didn't seem like a right fit for what we wanted to do. What we want to do is we want to understand what is our whole housing inventory, not just rental, but just what's our whole housing inventory? How does it shift over time? You know, where is our housing inventory that's in the flood zone and potentially at risk, et cetera. So I just expanded this to talk more about a geolocated database for housing, for our housing inventory, so that we can better understand what's going on with our housing inventory over time, especially that's at risk to flooding. We've talked about mapping areas that are suitable for new climate safe housing, kind of already happening through RPC contracts and implementing Act 181. So, you know, it's kind of already happening, but thought it would be important to call out here as a useful tool for understanding how we move this pathway forward. And then Chris Campany had talked often about trying to understand how many Vermonters have left or moved from impacts of both the 2023 and 2024 flooding, understanding that we may not be seeing the full impacts of those just yet. So even looking back to Irene to try and see if we can understand how, you know, how are we losing folks because they have been flooded and we don't have other options for them. So I think that's it.
All right, great.
All right, so we have one more little small presentation from Dahlia.
I'll go so quickly.
Go ahead, Dahlia. So
okay, I did a research project looking at the flooding impacts and recovery outcomes in both Vermont and North Carolina, specific to businesses and business resilience. And so I just came out with 3 key takeaways in both my research and from the business stakeholder that I attended that I think a lot of us did. The first one was prioritizing grants over loans. The second was building and strengthening relationships. And the third was increasing awareness of available resources. And so Scott and I are planning to work on incorporating these actions into the climate action plan, specifically underneath pathway 1. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. I'd love to see that.
Dahlia's summary, yes. I posted it online. I just put it in the chat. So
okay, good. Thank you. I don't know how to capture the chat in Zoom after. So every time somebody puts a link in the chat in Zoom, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta open that and save it, and then I forget where it came from.
I
but-
always have access to it, Andrea. So if
Okay.
folks need the chat, I can send it around.
Yeah, I think it would be great to put these links in the minutes, if we can. And I know Sue does a good job of kind of capturing what's in the chat too, as in the minutes. So I look forward to looking at that. And big, you know, in the summaries from the stakeholder, I kept seeing incentives and grants, and I was not really understanding necessarily what that meant. But I like how you just reminded me of grants rather than loans. That was definitely big in the stakeholder meetings. I have quite a few comments, and I don't want to take over time, and we don't have enough time to really dig into this. So maybe we'll just take like 5 minutes to kind of decompress, and I think we'll have to think of another way to get feedback. I took notes, and I'm happy to email the task group with what observations I had. And then, you know, hopefully on the 6th, we'll have a lot more time to dig into this. So does anybody have any comments they want to share? Chris put a couple in the chat already, so hopefully those are recognized and captured. Go ahead, Val.
Thank you, and thanks for that thorough review of the work you've been doing. I had one comment and a question. Just my comment is, yes, the focus on grants over loans is certainly ideal and more accessible, but under a new administration, I think the reality will be we'll need to perhaps rely more on loans, right? So whom can we work with to create new loan products that are more accessible for more Vermonters? And I also wanted to bring up, I really liked the idea you brought up that we need to better understand that relationship between housing and climate. And that might be, for me, coming from a very small rural Vermont town where we're not going to deploy community solar or, you know, much clean energy, where we can really make a difference in supporting Vermont's climate goals is in improving our housing stock. And without an energy code, what can municipalities do to really support people weatherizing and improving their energy use?
Yeah. Just hearing you go through this, I was like, well, that seems really important. That seems really important. That seems really important. So getting to that prioritization, I'm like, whew, that is going to be a challenge to prioritize these for sure. And it makes me wonder how many, these are all the new ones, how many that were existing are going to stay, or did any drop out? Or I'm just curious, and I don't want to get caught up in numbers, but I think the more the numbers, the harder it is to prioritize. So I just kind of wanted to understand that a little bit, and we can maybe just think about that more for our report outs in the next meeting too, because it's a lot. So I don't know if you just added 20 new or 15 new actions and didn't take any away, or how that sort of shakes out, or what it means for prioritization, but we can dig deeper on that.
I didn't do the math, but certainly something. I mean, I know that as we were going through the spreadsheet, I was pulling together the community capacity one, and I was essentially just hiding all of the rows where it had an action, but we weren't amending it at all. And so there's a fair number that you're not seeing here that are just kind of,
yeah,
we're not looking at. I've also been thinking a lot about the prioritization, and I can follow up for myself, like, right, how are we prioritizing? Like, how are we prioritizing for what? Are we prioritizing things that are really important and it seems like nobody's taking action on? Or are we prioritizing to say, look, of all of the things that the state could possibly do, this is happening, but it still needs to continue happening. We can't forget about it. We can't, you know, pump the brakes on it or lose it. So I think the question is what are we prioritizing for? And you know, there's housing stuff that I can say that's going to happen no matter what. I think
regardless if it's in the
not
climate
necessarily
plan or not.
important, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the climate counselors aren't forgetting that the housing stuff and all of our other climate actions are really interlinked. So what are we prioritizing for?
And just because they aren't put forward as prioritizations from our subcommittee doesn't mean that they're not going to be included still. They still will be included, but yeah, and we can talk more at the end about the prioritization because I have some guidance and some feelings on what that means, because I do not think we have the time as a subcommittee to go through all the actions and put it through the just transitions rubric and then put it through the what's it called, the foundational criteria for prioritization, which has like a 4-step process. We just don't have time to do that. So a lot of this is going to have to kind of be on gut, and we might have to do some reconciliation of that when the actual plan gets written. Scott, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Yeah, Andrea, you covered most of it. I mean, I think I said it several meetings ago, I wonder what the criteria will be for prioritization. And I know the council is going to have some input on that. And unfortunately, I won't be there at the end of this meeting. I have to leave very soon.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing what the criteria are for prioritization.
Yeah.
I have one other comment. One action. There was a strategy under 14 under the one that Marion presented on. There was a strategy. Now I have to find it. Strategy on participation, and basically the only activity under that, only action under that for the existing cap was developing remote meeting capability, and that was codified. So there were no other actions under that in the last cap. At the municipal meeting, I presented an idea, which I think comes back to what we've been talking about, is how do we make sure that that we have participation at all levels to make sure that programs are communicated properly, not only communicated properly, but that people locally, volunteers, staff, whatever, municipalities, can actually implement these programs. They have enough knowledge. They have the stakeholder connections within their community. They know who to reach out to. They have stakeholder groups that are willing to work with them. I don't have an idea how to do that or what the action would be, but I think it's something that would be important and we should continue to think about it. As I mentioned that 3 of us in the cross-sector group will look at some suggestions for weatherization. They might be parallel or replicable for other activities, especially emergency response. But I don't want that to get lost. I think it's a critical thing that we need to talk about.
Okay, thank you. And I know you have to go, Scott, so thanks for coming here. Safe travels. And
thank you. I'm looking forward to driving through snow, but it looks like I'm going to have to. Bye-bye.
Be safe. Chris, go ahead.
So what I'm going to say may be terribly unpopular and I may get flamed for it, but you know, I kind of look at Vermont as like one of the island nations that are trying to figure out how to survive. While, you know, and so let's say Vermont had, and you know, while also, of course, wanting to reduce greenhouse gases that they produce themselves. Because let's say Vermont has a hypothetical $1 billion for climate adaptation resilience. Do we put that into, do we prioritize greenhouse gas reduction, or do we prioritize making our compact settlements and life in Vermont possible? And if you look at our aggregate emissions, what we contribute to the global and national emissions profile is pretty low. But we know that right now, in the here and now, a number of our communities face literal existential threats. So to me, if I'm prioritizing actions, I'm going to prioritize adaptation resilience over greenhouse gas reduction. Because in the scheme of things, if we go net zero tomorrow, we still have villages that could wash away, you know, in the coming, you know, days, weeks, months, years. So from my prioritization perspective, that's where I'm coming from. That's not to say we shouldn't reduce greenhouse gases, not at all. But if we have limited resources, you know, we could,
Yeah.
again, we can go net zero tomorrow, but we still face, you know, a number of existential threats, so.
Yeah, and I saw your facial expression. I feel the same way. Yep, Chris, and you're on the council, so you get to weigh in on the overall prioritization. Bronwyn, go ahead. And then we're going to jump to
just
the next.
following on what Chris Campany was saying, and I think what a lot of us would really love to see is that strategic level coordination between all of the actions, because there are plenty of places where an action can serve resilience. And oh, by the way, you're going to be able to slip in or get some emissions reductions in the process, but it's not going to be something where people are having a hard time understanding why the focus is so much on emissions reductions. When it is a lot easier to get people on board if you're talking about resilience, and there's just so many strategies out there where you can actually do both. But in the way that the climate action plan has been set up to silos these things in separate groups, we're not getting those strategic level actions that can actually serve multiple goals in the best way possible for Vermonters. So yeah, Chris, it's on you to bring that back to the Climate Council and see if all of these actions coming together, if the Climate Council is going to be able to look at these and say, oh, hey, this action is really great for resilience, but if we do this, we can also slip some of the emissions reductions actions into that. So I support you in doing that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to infrastructure in the built environment and see how quickly Val can talk. Do you want me to share, Val, or do you have it?
I can share if I was going to go off the PowerPoint. That's okay with everyone.
Okay.
All right. Looks like I can share. And I invite everyone else on the task group to jump in and add more context to where I missed some. Oh, I'm getting up just a black screen. Oh, can you see it?
No.
Let me see. It says my screen sharing is paused. Why? Let me try again.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I wanted to start off a little high level before we dive into the revisions and changes we've made to strategies and actions. We started off with 4 strategies, and we've whittled those down to 2 to simplify things. I think Anne on our task group said the 2 very clear buckets, like our planning bucket and our doing bucket. So strategy 15A is all about planning. So any language that says prepare or assess goes under 15A, and then so implement, fund goes under 15B, strategy 15B, and we've made some tweaks to those strategies, which I'll go over as we go through this. Our task group has representation from many Vermont agencies, so DOT, Public Service Department. We have VEM on, where we lack expertises on all the water actions. So we've got multiple actions on water, wastewater, and stormwater, on which we've received some input from DEC and others to figure out how to revise those, what to keep, what we can replace, etc. Most of our actions are centered on actions for utilities, on transportation, again, on all the water issues, and then one on land use, which maybe we'll keep. Maybe we can have a discussion on whether that sits best with another task group. Before we dive into the revisions on this slide, I just captured the actions that we've kept as is. So there are 3 actions that fall under new strategy 15A, the planning bucket. because mostly these actions are already happening, they've got clear identified actors. So the agencies and organizations who are responsible for these actions know this action is for them. The language you see on your screen in bold are just slight revisions. So this third action item, expanding broadband to support remote work, etc., to reduce the impact of disruptions to travel, health, and safety. So we've added in the health component to that action, but otherwise these are the three actions that remain as is because they are advancing, just so folks know. But maybe we can spend more time on the revisions we've made, which is on the next slide, begins on the next slide. Oh, I have the power to do that. Maybe. There we go. All right. So the first revision we made is to the strategy itself. This is under Pathway 15, proactively and strategically investing to enhance resilience across those 4 sectors I mentioned earlier. To strategy 15A, which is to create a policy planning and organizational foundation to support effective investments in infrastructure resilience. We've added the language in bold. So by understanding exposure, identifying vulnerabilities and risks, investigating options, and prioritizing and planning. There seems to be a typo there, but this addition speaks to the work that needs to go into planning and laying a foundation for deployment. So all these actions under 15A are to lay this foundation, the plan for, assess, prepare, etc. So the following 4 actions on this page have been revised. The first one, utilities should conduct a cost-benefit analysis on resilience upgrades and seek non-ratepayer funding for these measures, was revised. Many of the actions just needed to be simplified and needed to identify an actor. The second one is supporting the development and implementation of an asset management program for all public water systems and publicly owned wastewater treatment works. This and many of the wastewater actions were consolidated. I can't remember, maybe somebody else does, how many wastewater, stormwater actions we had initially that we've whittled down, I think, to about 8.
Yeah,
And go
13
ahead.
to 7. Yeah.
Whittled down to 7.
Yeah, we got more input this morning where I think we can whittle them down even a little bit more, but yeah, essentially.
Okay, great. The next one is also a water-related action. So assessing the vulnerability of our drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater infrastructure assets, and then prioritizing opportunities to address vulnerabilities to those systems. This was revised to plan for and prioritize the at-risk assets. Examining the pros and cons of regionalizing or sharing resources for all water and wastewater treatment utilities and practices. Again, this was a revise and combine action, and seizing on efficiencies through regionalization. I'm going to pause there and see if anyone else from the task group wants to jump in with additional context before I move on. Okay. Next slide. Also, whoops, let's see if I could go back one. Okay, also under 15A, one more revision. Local and regional planners, utilities, and transportation providers and state agencies are to collaborate to identify mission-critical facilities and develop preparedness, survivability, and recovery plans and procedures, and identifying investments that mitigate the impact of extreme weather events to services providing these facilities. So this action item is really about these critical facilities versus critical infrastructure broadly. The revision here was a combination speaking to interagency collaboration on disaster preparedness and response. I'm going to pause here to see if anyone else from the task group wants to jump in on this one. Okay. So then moving on to what is now our second strategy, strategy 15B, was largely kept as is, except we added in the bold language. So the strategy is to increase the resilience of critical infrastructure broadly to severe weather and other climate change threats by improving system efficiency, reliability, and redundancies, especially at critical facilities. So critical infrastructure broadly, critical facilities like a hospital or a local EMS in your town. Lots of revised actions here. I'll try to quickly breeze through them. We updated the first one. Utilities should deploy technology for management, control, and optimization of distributed energy resources, including energy storage, for the purposes of improving both reliability and resilience while reducing costs for all customers. Here, this one really just needed an actor, so it was clarified to specify who would be doing what and calling out specific technologies and avoiding calling out specific technologies other than energy storage, just given that technology innovation is happening at a rapid pace. The next few, maybe all the rest of them are the wastewater ones, the revised and combined wastewater ones. And just quickly to say, most of these have been revised just for consolidation purposes. So understanding and developing opportunities for creating water and wastewater system performance efficiencies. There was some discussion on how to reduce inflow so that we're not getting into a resilience we're not getting into compromising the reliability of resilience of that system. The second one is increasing investments to municipalities for new and expanded facilities to support water and wastewater system performance efficiency. So this one is about increasing investment to these facilities for source pollution reduction. Also related to investment, developing a funding program to deploy solar and storage at water and or wastewater facilities to ensure continuity of operation during events. This one was revised to make these facilities more resilient. And then the last one we've got here is providing a sustainable funding source for identifying drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater infrastructure vulnerabilities. On these, we received input from DC and others because there were probably 12 or more water actions that seemed to be repetitive, but we couldn't quite work our way through what was important to keep and what could be culled out. Any other input or comments or context from other task group members on these?
I think just on this one about solar and storage at water and wastewater facilities, we had additional conversation with Neil at DEC this morning, and we might suggest reordering this one to say something more along the lines of develop a program to ensure continuity of operations, considering, for example, deploying solar and storage. He also brought up anaerobic digesters, and we just want to make sure we're not like jumping the gun and choosing the solution when really it's about coming up with something, a program and a solutions to ensure continuity of energy supply. And there may be multiple ways to solve that problem.
Okay, so being more technology agnostic.
Yeah.
In a clean energy, renewable energy?
Well, not necessarily.
Low to no emissions way, or, okay.
Some of it may just be, you know, on this replacing aging infrastructure with the most resilient alternatives, one we were talking about earlier, that's going to result potentially in a lot of lines being undergrounded and hardened in such a way that there may not be necessity of, you know, that'll change the equation or calculus for what could be deployed and for how long to be deployed, and you know, what the right solution is. And it might not be a particular type of technology at a particular location. It might, if that location is also vulnerable to, for example, flooding, you wouldn't want to install a bunch of infrastructure at a location that might get flooded and destroy all that infrastructure. So it may be, you know, lead to consideration of moving some of those facilities, or yeah, we just want to make sure that we're not we're not presupposing what the right solution is for a particular location, which may not need even its own on-site generation there. So yeah, that's where we were thinking it should be a little bit broader to allow for the right solution to be selected to match the need.
Thanks, Anne. I think this is our last slide. This is our third strategy that remained. This is strategy 17A. This is increasing investment in the infrastructure needed to support communities that are more resilient to climate disruptions, equitable and resource efficient, protecting the adaptive capacity of natural resources. This action's talking about any land use actions that could help achieve resilience, including compact settlement and compact settlement that needs water, wastewater infrastructure. We have one remaining action that we haven't changed, which is to monitor and update stormwater permitting processes as needed to ensure that green infrastructure is preferred in design considerations. And I think, but I'll just double check, that's the last one, yeah. Well, I will say we have not yet tackled new actions. So that's one of the next steps, as well as reviewing these revised actions, as Anne just talked about, making sure they're the right ones.
We might still come up with new ones. Is that what you just said?
We haven't discussed new ones. Well, I haven't been on all task group calls, so Andrea, please correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, we haven't discussed, are there any gaps, and do we need to create any new actions?
Yeah, I thought we kind of covered that, but yeah, maybe that's still something we need to do, but I didn't anticipate any new ones, but certainly if there seems to be some gaps in what we're presenting, then I think, yeah, obviously we should create that, but I thought what we were doing was to try to cover those, but we don't have much more time to build new actions unless we hear that something's missing. Anybody have any questions?
I'll withdraw my food power generation inquiries about whether or not you can generate power through wastewater treatment plants, like having generators bobbing up and down in the. So I'll withdraw that.
That's interesting. Neil was talking about the digesters and how they provide fuel or like an energy source, which I thought was cool. I did not know about. Not sure that's the greenest technology or whatever, but I don't know. Okay, going once, twice, three times, and we'll move on to public health. Alice, do you want me to share?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me do that.
Whoops. Getting the notes in front of me here. Not seeing it yet.
So I actually have to push the button. Sorry.
Thanks to Andrea's help, we look a little more professional than we got to. We don't yet really have a spreadsheet that looks like everybody else's, but we do have pathway strategies and actions. And what we did in our conversations is really talk about what is the role of public health, like what is the responsibility of public health. And we came up with, which is exactly one pathway, which is to support equitable adaptation to the public health impacts of climate change. And I think this comes from our very first meeting when Dr. Levine expressed, look, it's here, we've got health risks. We know in public health what the risks are and what the risks will be. The challenge is, how do we stay healthy as a population? Like Chris Campany said, you know, here we are, Vermont, and we're all trying to survive. So we have strategies and actions to support that pathway, which I believe is, we think we're pathway 19, as I remember. And what we're looking at in strategies is tools and mechanisms for increasing awareness of the public health risks that are really identified throughout the other pathways and task force committees here. We're looking to increase support for individuals and households on how they can stay healthy. We're looking for support. We're looking to increase the support for regional, municipal, and community partners to help people prepare and respond to climate health impacts, and really expand state capacity and municipal capacity for communicating to the public what the health risks are and what we can do with them, or how we can prepare for them and do something with them, but do something to mitigate them. What we're looking at is how do we communicate? And this is by routinely reviewing and updating the publicly available information about the climate health risks, and to make sure that we focus on disproportionately affected populations, including underserved communities, unhoused individuals, et cetera, et cetera. In here we touch on the topic of how do we support outdoor workers throughout climate challenges like heat, like poor air quality. We're looking to increase the tools that we can use to support Vermonters. There's a proposal in here for a citizens assistance registry for emergencies. Municipalities, towns should be able to compile this information from some of the local resources that do keep track of individuals that will need extra help. We have in here also a very good suggestion on developing community hubs or centers where individuals, families, et cetera, can go and get the information and the support they need. To add to that, I think we could put something in here about municipalities that we're talking about that don't have the resources that other municipalities have in terms of volunteers and select boards, et cetera, town government. And we would suggest that those towns talk about pooling their resources for a community hub that would serve multiple rural towns or communities that don't have enough resources. An example of that is that Waitsfield and Fayston have a shared fire department and shared local.
I'm sorry, Alice, am I on the right slide for you? I got a little lost. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can keep scrolling through it for people to read. I'm sort of just trying to tell you what the purpose is here.
Okay.
If you look at it, I think what you need to do is read through this and think about what we have come up for actions and strategies and suggestions to address what is the role of public health and climate change, which is to help people adapt to the impacts. Now that's really it in a nutshell. I mean, I could, expand on some of the strategies, but in terms of what the role of public health is in the climate action plan, I think is a very simple and succinct one. And this is all new. It's something that wasn't, like, we don't have any things that we've taken out because we didn't have anything really to take out. And when we look at the topics of like heat, energy efficiency, when we look at supporting cold weather in enhancing homes for their resilience to that, that's all in the other task force reports. So what we're really basically saying here is, how do we best communicate and keep up on the climate health emergencies, along with weatherization for cold weather. We also do have in here weatherization issues in terms of warmer weather, in terms of air conditioning, air purifiers, etc. And also things like making sure that people have screens that are adequate for keeping out the insects that would be the ones to spread the vector-borne diseases. So we kept it pretty simple and really focused on what our role is. How do we stay healthy?
That's great. Thank you, Alice. And kind of just scrolled through those. Hopefully people had time to kind of read them as Alice was talking there. Any questions, comments?
Oh, I would also say that I think what I would go back to the committee from things that I heard in the info sessions. Was the Vermont Food Bank had a very good point about food security and healthy food.
Yeah.
I think I would add that in here under actions. And the no, we do have the outdoor workers in here.
You do have the outdoor workers. I heard that, saw that. Jared, do you have anything to add? I think maybe, or Ben's not here anymore. I think he was on health too, but anything more to add?
Yeah, I think just one thing to flag is that while I think we felt pretty good about the different needs that we were identifying and general activities that were likely needed in response, I think kind of consistent with Anne's last comment, we were trying not to sort of predetermine the precise solution, and so I felt a little awkward at times of some of these seem a little less specific than would be useful for taking action, but that with a few exceptions, the specific action that is needed isn't obvious. Like, there are a lot of different ways to potentially address some of these. So I did want to flag that I feel like that's a little bit of a shortcoming of the way these are worded right now, though I feel a little, uncomfortable with trying to get further down the path of determining what that solution is. So I wanted to just flag that that dynamic that I think we've struggled with a little bit, and because these are all brand new and we're starting from scratch, I think we would probably benefit from more time to really think through these, and I know we just don't have that time.
Right. We struggled with that too. And even in our conversations with Neil this morning, that there is so much going on, and any one of these actions, if we were going to be reflective of actually what's happening on the ground, could have, you know, many, many more actions involved. And that's, you know, is that beneficial for this plan, or is that detrimental, or is it going in the wrong direction? So we struggled with that definitely too. I think different task groups probably went different directions on that. I don't think we can be reflective of all the needs of what should be happening and address all things. And that's where the prioritization is really going to become important.
And we have in here a number of suggestions and ideas, like a community hub for climate change, like ideas that municipalities can do, maybe joining together to form multi-town solutions. But I think the solutions and the actions are probably going to differ town to town on how this gets implemented. So this is more, here's what really needs to happen. We obviously need funding and staff to do this. We obviously need to make sure that we're communicating, especially on the website, et cetera, in multi-language. But well, I don't know what I was going to say after but I think this is a good starting place for what public health needs to address. How do we stay healthy?
Yep. Bronwyn, go ahead.
Just following on Jared's point, I just wanted to say that at times, at least, I actually find the strategies and the pathways to be the things that are most useful and most important to kind of get right, because a lot of these actions are going to change month to month, year to year. And so making sure that the Climate Commission can see, you know, this is how our overall, I keep saying strategy and I'm getting sick of it myself, so apologies, but this is what our overall strategy looks like. You know, whatever the specific action is, we need to make sure that we're expanding state capacity to plan, prepare, and respond to climate-related health hazards. And with that in place, then you can go look and see, what is the health department doing? What are other departments doing to help serve that strategy? So just to say that I think it's fine that, this is great that you've put out these strategies and gotten public health that attention in the strategy level. And also just wanted to say I really loved that last one about prioritizing state support for climate mitigation that enhances health, resilience, and health equity. And that's what I kind of wish we were doing across the board, is setting out these strategies and then finding the actions that can serve multiple of those goals and strategies that we have in there. So just to say, nice work on pulling something that is not been in the climate action before, pulling it together quickly and doing a really good job of it.
Yeah, totally. I second that. Anybody have anything else? Any other questions or comments on public health? Okay, then I think we will provide some time right now for anybody on the call from the public that wants to provide any input or reaction on what we've shared today, if there's anyone. Feel free to put something in the chat too, if there's anyone who wants to comment there. So next steps is where we're at, I guess. So the guidance that has been provided is to look at our actions, look at what might come of our recommendations, and apply the just transitions rubric. I can check in a second to see if I still have that up, and we can take a peek at that, as well as the foundational criteria. I'll actually have it linked. So I'm not sharing, am I? Am I sharing? Did I just stop sharing? Okay, this is where we're at. Sorry about that. So yeah, it's time for us to kind of hone in and pare down. I think because we don't have a lot of time today to really get into really in-depth discussion, I'm going to suggest, and I know it's a lot to ask, but for everyone to look at the stakeholder input and to go through in more detail the summaries provided online. They're linked there. It would be good if we're all working from the same thing, and go through those, reflect on what you heard today, and if anything is really sticking out, email the task group lead with your comments. And I would ask that we try to do that before the Thanksgiving break, because shortly after that, we're going to have to turn around, incorporate that input as task groups, and then prepare to apply at some level the equity lens and the prioritization criteria that are set forth here. And we're going to have to do that the week after Thanksgiving, which is going to be a couple of days. So it's going to be like, try to get a task group meeting in at the beginning of that week, probably a couple of hour task group meeting. I can't imagine it's going to happen any faster than that, or, however you guys can plan on meeting to, I would say, look to apply those foundational criteria. And I can see if they can come up. I did provide a link in the chat. There's basically 4 steps that you're looking at: feasibility, like relative impact, I think. Equity is one of them. I can't remember the other ones, but there's 5. Oh, actually, I have them listed here. Hold on a second, right at the bottom here. Impact, cost effectiveness, co-benefits, equity, technical feasibility. So those are all laid out in the foundational criteria document that is linked there. So I think task groups are going to have to take a look at that. I would recommend applying that to the strategy level. There is no way we can do that at the action level. And then based on that, kind of regroup and say, is this what we really think is important? Or do we need to say, do we need to change our actions that have been proposed to pull in what we think is really important? And then I would also say, sometime by the middle of that week, because we have our meeting on the 6th, ideally by like Wednesday, we would have our revised and prioritized actions to share. I think we should still include all the other actions, but we should prioritize as each task group what we, provide the recommendations in order of priority. So I'm not going to say any specific number necessarily, but put them in a prioritized order. And then that's what we will go through on December 6th in a longer meeting. Any comments, questions, suggestions on how to do that differently?
Just to say, I'll do the best I can. I turn into a turducken at 3 o'clock today, and for the remainder of the Thanksgiving period.
I get it. Mm-hmm.
And then I get back and got an MRI on Monday, and I'm in Montpelier Tuesday through Thursday. So I'll do what I can, but I think we're all in the same boat, and
we're all in the same boat, and it's going to be what it is when we present to the climate council.
I guess what I'm thinking is, we'll do that. I think that's the message. We have done the best we can, and there's no council police. We'll do the best we can, and that'll be it.
Yeah, it's really a lot of work. I will say though, like if you kind of step back and think about it, there's a lot of new actions, it seems like, coming from community capacity and planning. Obviously, public health is new. Infrastructure in the built environment has not put forth anything really new. It's a lot of revised. So when you think of it that way, sort of all the prioritization and that stuff has already been done for that. So lean back into the existing plan and think about how to use what's already been done to discuss that. But Alice, go ahead.
Are we supposed when we look at the prioritization under our actions, do we have one, or we could have more and just order them like 1, 2, 3 or something?
That's, yeah, and I would, well, I would do it at the strategy level. If you're going to actually kind of be pointed about going through that process, I would do it at the strategy level. Too many actions to do it. You'd be there all, I mean, this could take a year.
Oh,
So honestly, if you do it at all, because I really think even doing it at the strategy action is difficult at this point. So it may just be kind of like does everybody agree this is what needs to go up? And we're not going to document it right now. It may need to be documented later how that came about, but keep them in mind. We know what we're looking for. Is this easy to do? Is it tangible? Is it going to produce results that are needed? So that's what we need to be thinking about. And I would say put those in order, but don't put them in order. And then we'll say, we're going to stop at 4 on this one, and we're going to stop at 2 on this one. As a collective, we think these are the top 10 for our subcommittee to consider. So that's going to be our goal for December 6th meeting. We'll take another week and have a few people sort of clean that up and then share that out with each other again on December 13th and make sure that everybody is okay with what's going forward to the council. That December 13th meeting, I'm wondering if we should try to change it because we're supposed to get this to the council on the 13th. Anyway, thoughts on that are very welcome. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
Speaking to the challenges of this, we all only have so much time. Like you're saying, there's a lot in here. I don't think it's a bad thing if the message that ends up getting passed back up to the Climate Commission is like, guys, rural resilience is a huge body of work that does not have the benefit of all of the data and analysis that's already gone into greenhouse gas emissions for the past 20 years before we picked up on emission side stuff, right? So if our message is, I mean, just to take health for an example, that was not included in the climate action plan at all to date, not very well, at least.
Yep.
And now we've got these actions, and I don't think it benefits anybody from the commission to anybody in the state to say, hey, this is a big gap in our climate action plan. Here's the one action that is most important. Right? Like, that's not the message. The message is, hey guys, health has been kind of left off the table, and we don't need one action. We need some resources to go into thinking through what this looks like in the climate action plan. It's not one action. It is developing an entire new section of the climate action plan. So I will just say that, but like, so
no, sorry, I'm just laughing at Chris's reactions. They're so much better than emojis.
I'm wondering if, I know I like the actual live thumbs. I'm wondering if, I don't know, maybe I'm feeling, why at 1:51 on a Friday am I feeling inspired to do more work? But I feel like through these stakeholder meetings, through our conversations, I feel like we could probably come up with like 10 solid like messages, whether it's like public health in general needs a ton of work. Infrastructure is really critical, but it's kind of moving forward. Businesses have kind of been left off, and I feel like we can come up with 10 messages that are either at the strategy or action level, and then kind of figure out like, what is the recommendation for public health? I would say the recommendation is put some more effort and resources into making this a priority, not into one single health action that we happen to be able to draft up. So I feel like for rural resilience, we actually need much more flexibility to like really step back and listen to what we've heard and come up with those recommendations that are not necessarily, hey, support this one action. It's really focus on this strategy or really focus on this because it's been underserved.
We just had a conversation earlier today that maybe the initial climate action plan was a bit of a disservice because it set us up for like these 200 something actions where that's maybe not the most productive way to approach what really needs to happen. So anyway, I want to say, and I know I see 2 more hands up, but Otis put a comment in the chat, and I think it's important when we are going through, and literally if you can just take less than an hour, half an hour to go through the summary provided and just pick out like, well, I think I read that in infrastructure and buildings, and I read it in public health, and I read it in community capacity. Like flag those things so that when we get together on the 6th, like we don't have to have a single action on every single one of these. We can focus on a strategy to say, we need to do vulnerability assessments of this, or, you know, I don't know, just that's, yeah. I won't say it again because I keep saying lumping and splitting, but Danielle, go ahead, please.
I just have a simple ask. Can you remind me who the task group leaders are and their contact info so we can send comments out?
Yes, let me, I'll do a summary of this meeting, but so I don't think we'll even have the minutes soon enough. If you're a task group lead, can you just put your contact in there?
That'd be great, thank you.
Supposed to be the Vermont partner. Yeah, and then there's Scott. Can somebody do Scott's? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I mean, I was saying in the chat, I'm happy to carry the water for whatever this subcommittee wants to carry up. And the other thing that I'll just know, I mean, I'm relatively new back to the council, but as I said to the council at our meeting this week, you know, having just come back, having the events that we've had over the last, you know, couple of years,
yeah,
it's like, what in the hell are we doing? I mean, we have not really engaged with actual frontline communities that have dealt with the damages. What are we doing? Because it feels like we are just like in another universe. And if you want to piss off the people of Vermont, you know, come out with a plan that's just disassociated from the reality that a lot of people are living. So I am very happy to carry the water. I think we do what we need to do. And there's nobody that's going to arrest us. I don't think of people in the state. I don't think you're going to get demoted or anything. I think we just need to this is a time for honesty and candor. And I'm happy to carry whatever message this group wants to be carried, and you know, hopefully other counselors on this committee too.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yes, I think the world of mitigation has been a thing for so long, and resilience relatively is a new concept and a really clear like slap in the face that this is maybe not going to be a once in a 20-year, 30-year, 10-year even kind of catastrophic level. It's not just a little damage here and there. It's, you know, it's not like it was with Irene when we had a little flooding before that and a little flooding after that. You know, it's big, it's huge. So I think the world needs to get their head around that this is just as important as mitigation, or more so. What else? Got a couple minutes left.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Okay, we can do that. I wanted to share, and I need to look at it more closely. Anne and I were on a meeting with Neil this morning, and he shared this like super simple like infographic that I like just really scanned over really quickly. I can try to drop it in the chat. But I was like, well, that's nice. And it was just like a strategy with like 3 little actions underneath each one. And it was colorful and had a bubble of like a picture and just a few words of what needed to be done under that. And I was like, oh yeah, it's so refreshing. And just put it in the chat. So that's maybe just something to think about, how we want to communicate from rural resilience, and maybe offer that as, and it might not be that, but how can we really make this simple? Even if there's a whole bunch of stuff that backs it up, but as a cover page, what's simple and what can people take away from this plan really easily? So anyway, some different thoughts on communicating and what this plan looks like. And I know the Climate Action Office is thinking about that too. So, okay. Happy weekend. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for everything you're doing.
Yeah.
In all regards.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.